Hello and welcome to the next installment of the GOG's Inclusion, Diversity, Equity, and Access IDEA Commitment Education Program. I'm Dr. Tashana Myers, a gynecologic oncologist from Bay State Medical Center. I am thrilled to be joined today by my colleagues, Dr. Tara Castellano and Dr. Brian Slomovitz, for today's IDEA Commitment discussion on commitment to DEI. Dr. Castellano, can you introduce yourself?
Hi, thank you, Dr. Myers. Tara Castellano. I'm a GYN oncologist at LSU Health Sciences Center in New Orleans, and I'm very happy to be here talking about a subject that's dear to my heart.
And Dr. Slomovitz.
Hey guys, Tashana, thanks so much for hosting this. My name is Dr. Brian Slomovitz. I'm a gynecologic oncologist down here in Miami Beach, Florida at Mount Sinai Medical Center, and I'm really looking forward to this very, very, very important discussion. So thanks for having me.
The GOG Foundation Incorporated would like to thank our commercial supporters for their support of the GOG's IDEA Commitment Initiative. We want to thank Immunogen and GSK. All right, so let's get started. The mission of this initiative is to educate the key stakeholders in the design and conduct of clinical trials in gynecologic oncology on why diversity in clinical trials is important, what barriers exist for patients from underrepresented racial and ethnic populations, and what steps healthcare professionals can take to mitigate racial ethnic disparities, and overall promote equity and justice to ensure clinical trial access for all. So our next slide shows where are we as an organization. These are all of our GOG sites, which I'm proud and excited about. We can see that we have some gaps on our map, but we are well represented in most of the country. And this is our 2020 diversity census, right? And so this is really going to be the beginning of our conversation. How do we make sure that we are keeping this in mind as we grow our research enterprise and create equity? All right, so let's dive right into the conversation. So looking at the map, what does diversity look like for you, Dr. Castellano and Dr. Slomovitz?
Yeah, I think looking at this map, I'm there in South Louisiana, and you can tell diversity for us is we're majority Black state. And so I think it's really important that not only just to think about race, but cultural identity and ethnicity. What's not captured on these maps are the high levels of admixture of races and cultures, especially in South Louisiana. And also kind of the other things that aren't captured is the diversity of distance patients have to travel, whether they're in a rural or a urban setting. So there's a lot of, like we like to say, gumbo in South Louisiana. We have a lot of things to think about and consider when we're seeing our patients. But for us, you know, it can have a lot of shared culture. So that's what we really focus on. Even though we might look different and live in different settings, there's a lot of shared cultural identity. So that's kind of our common thread that we focus on.
Yeah, no, that's it's exciting, you know, because you know we're probably an hour and a half flight away, and while yours is mostly in an orange state listed here, but orange equals Black. You know, in South Florida, we really have a Latino population, and if you look closely, the light green is actually 2 or more races. So, you know, Miami is a gateway city, meaning that you know a lot of folks from around the world come through the U.S. through Miami, similar to New York in a lot of ways, and you know I'm sure you get a lot of that in Louisiana and L.A. We're focusing on diversity, and one of the things, you know, we all come into work every day. We want to do what's best of our patients. That includes providing the latest and greatest and standard of care treatments. It's important that when we talk to our patients about the latest clinical trials and the latest developments, that we could really translate that across all races, all ethnicities, all backgrounds. And if we don't, we need to do a better job in doing that in our clinical trials, and we need to in order to translate those results across the board. So specifically Tashana, Miami's diverse. There's a lot of different cultures, and you know, it's our sites, ours and Tara's, and then obviously Tashana's yours, that we need to get this accrual up in order to come up with the best results of our studies across all different populations.
And ironically, I'm in Massachusetts, so my site's lacking a lot of color. But we definitely have pockets where there are communities that are struggling for access. So if you look at, I'm from Massachusetts, we have half of our state that's really clustered, and then I'm on the western half. And so people travel huge distances. We have a large rural population that we serve. And we also have a major airport that's near. So we have a huge influx that doesn't really get captured in the census. All right. So, I'm so glad, because you guys are really representing two different populations. And I think that's what we all need to understand, is that we're all doing the same work, but it looks very different based on who we're taking care of. So how do you engage with your different communities to build trust? Because we understand that trust can be an issue either between the providers, the institutions. So how are we doing that work in your locations?
Yeah, I'll go first. I think the overarching theme is it takes a little extra time, and you got to be willing to put in that time for extra counseling to answer those questions. I'll often offer a follow-up visit just to talk about the research protocol, the benefits, but also peer matching. That's been very successful for me. I'll offer patients to talk to someone who maybe comes from the same community they're from, that has been through the research protocol that I'm offering to them, the treatments they've been through. And people are generally pretty accepting to that. And as a peer mentor, people always want to talk about their experience. So, letting the patients uplift each other. And then the last thing I do that I feel like is following up with the patients when results are reported, I share those as successes with the patient, so they can really see that the extra visits, the extra checks that come in, participating in research really pay off to move the needle in our progress in cancer care. And they're really proud to be a part of that. So, and then they go talk to their family, their friends, their community. And then, there's a whole bunch of community outreach and engagement. I'm sure Dr. Slimovitz can touch on that whole angle of it as well.
So this is the most important part of the conversation, is to rebuild trust. We're not starting at the starting line. We're starting well before the starting line, because there have been a lot of events historically that have really affected the trust that diverse populations have in the healthcare system. And that's really what we need to do to help overcome that. So yes, Tara, it's from day one in our offices, making patients feel more comfortable, explaining things to them in their own language is important. Here in South Florida, we have, people think, oh, English and Spanish. It's not the case. We have Creole populations. Even just today, I was on the phone with a Creole translator with one of my patients from the start to finish about getting them comfortable in clinical research, having the translated informed consent, because we need to make sure our patients feel that we're not, shutting them out or pulling the wool over their eyes, doing something that they don't want us to do. Those are really some of the key steps, and patients need to be engaged in the process, and we need to explain to them why we're doing it, because we want the results to translate into those populations. And as I was thinking, not only Creole, but other languages as well. We have a large Brazilian Portuguese population, so Portuguese is not the same as Spanish, and other attempts, and going to the communities, going to the community centers, going to the churches, things like that is extremely important.
Yeah, I think I've found that whenever I'm invited to speak, right, clinical trials is always at the center of my heart and thoughts, and that I always present whatever topic I'm asked, but I always slip clinical trials in, because I really want that to be familiar and comfortable, that when they enter into the health system, we have a large health system, that clinical trials isn't this thing that isn't discussed, it is unfamiliar, that nope, this is part of care. You should be hearing about this just like you're hearing about everything else. The other thing that I encourage people to think about is your top 3 languages, right? So yes, English, Spanish, but like, what are the other 2 languages that are, when that patient walks in, that you should have on hand? And so I think that's another thing that people should start to think about. How do we stretch ourselves, and how do we make everyone feel comfortable in their door? So thinking about that, our patients look different. We have many questions we want to answer. How do you build your portfolio? How is DEI helping you to shape the types of studies that you open?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And let me lead in that. One of my responsibilities is I'm the uterine cancer clinical trial advisor lead for the GOG partners. And building a portfolio of the institution is not just up to the local investigators, but it's also just the complete process from identifying the type of patients we're going to see in a population. As you know, Tashana, there's some variants of endometrial cancer that more likely affect and have a worse prognosis in Black patients than white patients. So when we're choosing the sites that we're going to open those trials, we obviously want to take a look at this map and focus more on those centers that see those populations. And then, from within an institution, we want the sites to fill out their interest surveys and seek out those trials that they're best going to accrue to and really best going to contribute to a trial. Not all sites can open all endometrial cancer trials. We don't want them to. We want them to be selective in choosing those sites that can be representative of population. For example, a cervical cancer trial, we want, we know socioeconomic factors play a role in developing cervical cancer. So we want to focus more on the public hospitals and some more of those less affluent settings than we would in other settings and things like that. And then on a site level, again, picking the trials, not only an investigator sitting in his or her office picking trials, but working with your nurse navigators, working with your clinical research officers to help identify those. And then I want to hear what Tara says, but my last point is, each of these questions doesn't have to be reinventing the wheel at your site. This webinar right now is a tool that you can use to help you out. Seek out advice, seek out your partner, seek out your friends at NRG meetings, SGO meetings, and talk to Tashana. What are you doing at your site, Tashana, and things like that, which is important. You're not in, it sounds cliche, but you're not in this alone in order to attain this goal. Tara, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I agree 100% with all of that. I think the goal is to have a portfolio that matches the patients you treat and the diseases that you manage. And when I started my job, I said, wow, we have a mismatch of, disease site to patients. And so we really, on a granular level, really started tracking our data and who are the patients that have cancer and not getting offered a clinical trial. Okay, what's open, and really engaging with the GOG and seeing and, going to the meetings and seeing what's available. Oh, we have an unmet need in this site at advanced uterine. And just like Dr. Slomovitz said, it goes down to the molecular level. Like, it might not make sense for me to open up an endometrial cancer trial where you have to have wild type P53 because most of my patients don't have that. So, and then on top of that, we go through and we review the protocol together as a committee and make sure we don't have competing trials, because it's not good for the patients. It's not good for the resources. And I think we learned that during COVID when a lot of us got lean. And to be lean, we didn't want things to fall apart. So we had to get efficient and really focus our resources on protocols that we could add a meaningful accrual to. So I think it's really important. And it's always sad when you have a patient, you don't have a trial for them, and there's one out there. So I try to prevent that from happening. I want to have a clinical trial for every patient. That's kind of how we approach it.
Yeah, I think that's an important message for young investigators, right? Because you come out of fellowship where you've had this huge plethora of options, and then you go to your first job and you have to be selective. And so I always try to tell more junior investigators, really think about who you see, because you want the person you see to have a trial. It's not just about making sure you have something in every disease site. So it was a lesson I learned early. I opened up a GTD study. We see one patient every 3 years, who's usually treated with a DNC, right? Like, it's just not the disease. And we had to allocate resources. So being thoughtful, you will work towards the mission. We will find a cure for these women. We will get these drugs to market. If we choose the ones that we actually see. So that's great. So does the team matter? When you are hiring and recruiting and building the team, is that something you take into consideration? And if you do, are you maximizing that? What are some best practices around building the actual research team, right? Because it's more than just us.
I think that's a great point. The team definitely matters. people like to, one thing that's inherent, people like to talk to women and not, not only women, research folks that are very similar to them. So sometimes it may mean, having as a nurse navigator or just as an outreach person, a Black research coordinator, which may very well help, or someone, who could speak to them in Spanish, which very well help. We do have translation lines, and that's very important, much more important than having a family translate, right? You want to have an independent translator. But, the enemy of good is perfect, but in an ideal world, we want to have as many of those languages and cultural backgrounds represented on both teams, so people don't feel that they're being talked to or just sort of going through the motions. We really want to help embrace that there. Tara?
Absolutely. I mean, the easy answer is yes, team matters. So when we have some leeway on hiring, we do try to not just hire people that look like the patients, but understand the community. You must imagine, like in New Orleans, it's hard to recruit people to live here if they're not familiar with the area and the special kind of things that happen in this healthcare system. And so just even having someone that speaks that language to the patients and understands kind of the barriers specific to them is very helpful. And it is not just at the physician level, it's, the MA who's rooming the patient and the CRCs and the PIs, everyone at every level is very important.
Agreed. So the last thing I wanted to just talk about is, again, for these developing sites. So we have a mix in our portfolio of well-established sites, and we have younger sites. For those of us who are developed and we're enrolling, how do we do better in regards to DEI, right? How do we get to that next level to help grow this mission and support the commitment that we're making as an organization?
Yeah, I could start with that. I think the way to do it is to identify key areas and to solve them one at a time. Because we're not going to be able to solve just to say, oh, I want to do diversity and increasing that in our patients. We can't do that without doing baby steps. For example, one of the big things in diverse populations is for bad reasons, they sort of feel like, well, if they do a clinical trial, they're going to get no treatment. We need to explain to patients, for example, placebo trials doesn't mean they're not getting treatment. It means the standard of treatment may not be anything, and we're trying to add to it. So, one of the things people may be hung up on, well, if I go on a clinical trial, I may not get anything. That's not there. We have to educate. Again, this is a baby step that all patients are going to get at least the right standard of care. Even if that means placebo, that's the standard of care. And that's such I explain that to patients once a week. Well, doc, you're talking to me about a clinical trial, but then I might not get that drug you're talking about. No. The clinical trial's testing a new drug versus nothing, or they are still getting that drug as part of the experimental arm. And then another big area, and then I want to hear what Tara, I'm interested to hear what Tara has to say, is partnering with the drug sponsor, whether the sponsor is the NRG or whether it's a more of a industry partner. It's not just what we're doing in our office to make sure that the materials coming out from the sponsor are also comforting and non-threatening to the diverse populations. Again, so we've for example, what I'm saying, your question is huge. How do we do it? Let's break them down into little pieces. Those are two of the things that I do. I make sure patients know that we're not experimenting on them, that they're getting the best standard of care even if they're going to the trial. And I try to interact with them in a way that, even on a local level, we're not the big bad drug industry, that the drug partner is really, now that wasn't an example, I'm not saying they are, it's the company is really partnering with us to get the job done.
Yeah, I think all of those things and taking it in pieces definitely makes it easier. I think one of the things that we have the unique privilege of working with the GOG is, as we're developing these protocols, really being thoughtful about the inclusion and exclusion criteria, but also some of the administrative burden. When can we design trials where maybe we can do virtual consents and telephone things that just remove the barriers, you know, at LSU, we have a virtual research nurse. So when we have a protocol that is friendly for rural patients, you know, we're able to enroll patients in Lafayette, which is a 3-hour drive away. So I think if on the front end, you know, having some say in the protocol design, that's a big piece that we can help, and we can encourage sponsors to think that way. You know, I know there's always competing reasons and why protocols are designed a certain way, but I think we have to continue to advocate for that lens, you know, not to exclude people unnecessarily. And then I think, you know, everything that Dr. Slomovitz said, it really goes back to what I said at the beginning. It's really taking that extra time, you know, and having that script, whether it is talking about, you know, randomization or concepts that can be sticking points with patients when you get down into the clinic room and try, you know, asking a patient to consent to trial. So big picture to little picture all along the way. It takes a little extra foresight, a little extra thought, but with some intentionality, we can really improve diversity and accrual on our clinical trials.
I want to thank both of you. I think, you know, as I've listened to this conversation, I think also knowing who you are as a site, right? Keeping track of what are the diversity numbers in your institution. I think as we start designing trials, we're going to look for that information. Knowing the diversity of your population will be important. So this concludes our program. Thank you, Tara. Thank you, Brian, for being a part of this very important conversation. The GOG Foundation Incorporated would again like to thank Immunogen and GSK for their generous support of the GOG's IDEA Commitment Initiative. For more information on the GOG's IDEA Commitment Initiative, please visit our website at www.gog.org/IDEA-commitment to join us in making your IDEA commitment.
Thank you.
Thanks, Deshaun. Thanks for your leadership on this. It's really phenomenal.